Carla Torres was mocked the moment she showed fear at Summit Aviation Institute's cliffside observation deck. Ridiculed by elite students, humiliated by instructors, and dismissed for her apparent acrophobia. They sabotaged her evaluation, laughed, as she trembled at heights, and destroyed her application before her eyes. No one knew that the quiet woman afraid of heights was Captain Carla Torres, F-22 combat veteran and record holder for the most dangerous high-altitude canyon missions. Until she flew an F-22 Raptor inverted through Crimson Canyon and silenced their mockery forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Utah sun blazed mercilessly over the jagged peaks surrounding Summit Aviation Institute, casting sharp shadows across the sprawling complex that clung to the mountainside like a monument to human ambition. This wasn't just any flight school, it was the playground of America's elite, where billionaire heirs and corporate dynasties came to add pilot to their collection of expensive hobbies. The Institute's glass and steel structures jutted out from the cliff face, defying gravity with the same arrogance as the students who walked its halls. Private jets lined the tarmac like gleaming trophies, their corporate logos and family crests catching the morning light. The air hummed with the sound of money, the purr of luxury helicopters, the whisper of designer flight suits, and the constant chatter of trust fund beneficiaries discussing their next acquisition. This was where senators' children learned to fly, where tech moguls' heirs played with million-dollar aircraft, where influence and inheritance mattered more than actual skill. Into this world of manufactured excellence stepped Carla Torres, a woman whose appearance immediately marked her as an outsider. Her faded denim jacket hung loose over a simple gray t-shirt, both showing the wear of countless washings. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, no designer highlights or salon styling. Her sneakers white canvas with scuffed toes squeaked slightly against the polished marble floors as she walked. The single duffel bag slung over her shoulder looked like it had seen more airports than most of these students had seen countries. The contrast was immediate and brutal. As Carla approached the main reception area, conversations died. Manicured fingers pointed in her direction, followed by barely concealed snickers. The receptionist, a perfectly groomed woman in a crisp uniform that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, looked up from her computer screen with barely disguised disdain. "Excuse me, miss," the receptionist said, her voice carrying the practiced politeness that barely concealed contempt. "Are you perhaps looking for the maintenance entrance? It's around back." Carla's dark eyes met the woman's gaze steadily. "I'm here to register for the advanced pilot training program," she said quietly, her voice carrying a subtle accent that spoke of working-class neighborhoods and long hours. The receptionist's perfectly penciled eyebrows rose dramatically. Behind Carla, she could hear the whispers starting a venomous chorus of judgment that seemed to follow her like smoke. A group of students in matching designer flight jackets had gathered near the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the canyon below. Their leader, a blonde woman whose diamond earrings caught the light like tiny stars, stepped forward with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in her life. "Did she just say pilot training?" "Brittany." Hunt's voice carried clearly across the reception area, designed to ensure maximum humiliation. "Honey, this is Summit Aviation Institute, not a community college flight simulator class." The group erupted in laughter, their phones already out, recording what they clearly saw as entertainment. Brittany's Instagram account, with its millions of followers, had turned casual cruelty into an art form. Her father owned 3 airlines, and she treated aviation like her personal hobby, a way to add exotic locations to her social media feed. "Look at that bag," sneered Marcus Webb Jr., whose grandfather had founded one of the major aerospace companies. "I've seen better luggage at a bus station." "And those shoes, are those from a thrift store?" The receptionist cleared her throat delicately. "Ma'am, I think there might be some confusion. Our program requires significant financial investment and certain standards. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable with one of the community programs in the valley." Carla reached into her jacket and pulled out a thick envelope, placing it carefully on the marble counter. "My application and payment," she said simply, "in full." The reception area fell silent for a moment, the only sound the distant hum of aircraft engines. The receptionist opened the envelope with the air of someone handling something distasteful, her expression shifting from disdain to confusion as she saw the cashier's check inside. This is the full tuition amount," she stammered. "Plus accommodation fees," Carla added quietly. Brittany's perfectly glossed lips curved into a cruel smile. Well, looks like someone cleaned out their life savings for a little adventure. How quaint." She turned to her followers, her voice dripping with mock concern. "Should we tell her that money can't buy talent? Or that some people just aren't meant to fly?" The group's laughter was like broken glass, sharp and cutting. More phones appeared, the incident already being live-streamed to thousands of followers across multiple social media platforms. Hashtags were already forming in their minds. #WrongPlanet, #SLUMING at Summit #RealityCheck. As Carla filled out the paperwork, her hands steady despite the verbal assault, lead instructor Ryan Mitchell emerged from the elevator bank. A former Navy pilot whose career had stalled at middle management, he had found his niche at Summit by catering to the egos of wealthy students while maintaining the pretense of military discipline. His uniform was immaculate, his hair perfectly styled, and his expression carried the particular brand of smugness that came from wielding small amounts of power over those he deemed beneath him. "What's all the commotion?" Mitchell asked, though his tone suggested he was already enjoying whatever drama was unfolding. "New student," Brittany said with exaggerated sweetness. "Though I think there might be some confusion about which program she's applying for. Maybe she meant to sign up for ground crew training?" Mitchell's eyes swept over Carla with the practiced assessment of someone who had spent years judging people based on their appearance and perceived social status. What he saw clearly didn't impress him: the worn clothes, the practical haircut, the complete absence of the designer accessories that marked his usual students. "Ms." he began, consulting the paperwork. "Torres," Carla replied, her voice steady. "Miss Torres," Mitchell continued, his tone taking on the condescending quality of someone explaining something to a child. "Summit Aviation Institute maintains certain standards. Our program is designed for individuals with specific backgrounds and capabilities. Perhaps you might want to reconsider and look into some of the more accessible options in the area." The implication hung in the air like smog. Around them, the marble floors and glass walls reflected the wealth and privilege that seemed to pulse through every surface of the institute. This was a place designed to exclude, to separate the worthy from the unworthy based on zip codes and bank balances rather than skill or determination. Carla's response was to reach into her bag and pull out a folder containing her medical clearances. Background checks and preliminary test scores, all perfectly in order, all meeting or exceeding the Institute's published requirements. She placed them on the counter with the same quiet dignity she had shown throughout the encounter. "Everything appears to be in order," the receptionist admitted reluctantly, though her tone suggested she wished it weren't. Mitchell's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. In his world, money talked. But the right kind of money: generational wealth, family connections, corporate sponsorships. This woman represented something that made him uncomfortable, someone who had earned their way into his exclusive domain through means he couldn't control or dismiss. "Well," he said finally, his voice carrying a warning wrapped in false courtesy, "I suppose we'll see how you handle the unique challenges of our program. Fair warning, Miss Torres, we don't make accommodations for students who can't keep up with our standards. As Carla gathered her paperwork and headed toward the dormitory assignment area, the whispers followed her like a shadow. Phones captured every step, every gesture, already crafting the narrative that would define her time at Summit. To them, she was already a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happened when people reached beyond their station. But if they had looked more carefully, if they had seen past the worn clothes and modest appearance, they might have noticed something else. The way Carla carried herself, the unconscious precision in her movements, the calm confidence that came not from inheritance but from facing real challenges and emerging victorious. They might have noticed the small scar on her left hand, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, a memento from ejecting from a damaged aircraft over hostile territory. Most importantly, they might have noticed that despite their mockery, despite their cruel assumptions, Carla Torres showed no fear. Not of their judgment, not of their social media campaigns, not of their attempts to break her spirit. But they would learn soon enough that some fears run deeper than others, and that sometimes the most dangerous assumptions are the ones we make about what we think we see. The orientation tour began at 9 sharp, with Ryan Mitchell leading a group of 20 students through Summit's gleaming facilities. The route was carefully designed to impress, starting with the $1 million simulators, moving through the hangar filled with private jets, and culminating at the Institute's crown jewel, Cliff Point viewing area. This glass-enclosed observation deck jutted out from the mountainside like a diving board over the abyss, offering an unobstructed view of Crimson Canyon's 2,000-foot drop. Carla walked quietly at the back of the group, her worn sneakers silent against the polished floors, while designer boots clicked authoritatively ahead of her. The other students moved with the casual confidence of people who had never questioned their right to occupy any space they entered. Their conversations flowed around topics that revealed their backgrounds: weekend trips to Paris, family yachts anchored in Monaco, internships at Fortune 500 companies that their parents happened to own. The viewing deck represents Summit's philosophy, Mitchell announced as they approached the glass doors leading to Cliff Point. Aviation is about conquering fear, embracing the void, mastering the vertical world. Only those who can face the ultimate drop can truly command the sky. Brittany Hunt, who had positioned herself near the front of the group like a queen holding court, turned to flash a perfect smile at her Instagram camera. "Can't wait to show you guys the most incredible view in Utah," she narrated to her followers. "Only the elite get to experience this level of—" She paused mid-sentence, her attention caught by something behind her. As the group approached the glass doors, Carla's steady pace had begun to slow. Almost imperceptibly at first, then more noticeably. Her breathing, which had remained calm throughout the morning's harassment, became shallow. Her hands, which had remained steady while filling out paperwork under scrutiny, began to tremble. Slightly, Marcus Webb Jr. was the first to notice. "Hey, look at the charity case," he called out, his voice carrying the excitement of someone who had just spotted fresh prey. "What's wrong? Afraid of a little glass?" The group turned as one, their predatory instincts activated by the scent of vulnerability. Carla had stopped completely now, standing about 10 feet from the entrance to Cliff Point, her face pale, her dark eyes fixed on the glass expanse that offered nothing but empty air and the distant canyon floor. "Oh my God," Brittany breathed, her voice filled with delighted disbelief. "She's afraid of heights." She immediately pivoted her camera toward Carla, her followers spiking as the drama unfolded in real time. "Guys, you are not going to believe this. We have someone here who wants to be a pilot, and she's literally terrified of heights." The laughter that erupted was cruel and immediate. Phone cameras appeared like vultures circling carrion, each student eager to capture and share this moment of weakness. The hashtags were already forming. #AfraidToFly, #GroundedBeforeStart, #Height Phobia. Mitchell's expression shifted from casual disdain to something approaching genuine disgust. In his worldview, fear was the ultimate weakness, and displaying it publicly was a cardinal sin. "Miss Torres," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent corridor. "Surely you can't be serious about pilot training if you're afraid to step onto an observation deck." Carla's response was barely a whisper. "I can't." The words seemed torn from her throat, each syllable a confession of inadequacy that the group seized upon like sharks detecting blood in the water. "She can't," Marcus repeated, his voice filled with mock amazement. Did everyone hear that? The wannabe pilot literally cannot step onto a viewing platform. How exactly does she plan to handle an aircraft at 30,000 feet? A new voice joined the Chorus Academy director Scott Barnes, who had emerged from the elevator with perfect timing to witness the spectacle. Barnes was a man who had built his career on exclusivity, on maintaining Summit's reputation as a place where only the worthy were allowed to soar. His arrival added an official weight to the humiliation. "What seems to be the problem here?" Barnes asked, though his tone suggested he was already enjoying the answer. "Our new student appears to have a small issue with heights," Mitchell reported, his voice dripping with false concern. "She's unable to proceed with the standard orientation tour." Barnes approached Carla with the measured pace of a judge delivering a verdict. "Miss Torres, is it true that you're afraid of heights?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Around them, phones continued recording, social media feeds updating in real time with commentary that grew more vicious by the minute. The glass doors to Cliff Point seemed to mock her, their transparency offering a clear view of the void that waited beyond. "I have difficulties with certain situations," Carla managed, her voice barely audible. "Difficulties," Barnes repeated, turning the word over like he was examining a particularly interesting specimen. "Ms. Torres, aviation is fundamentally about height. It's about leaving the ground behind and embracing the vertical world. If you can't handle standing on a simple observation deck, how do you expect to handle the cockpit of an aircraft?" The logic was unassailable, and everyone present knew it. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group, punctuated by barely suppressed laughter. Brittany's commentary to her followers became increasingly savage, her voice carrying clearly across the corridor. "This is honestly painful to watch," she narrated. "Imagine spending all your savings to come to the most elite flight school in the country, only to discover you're afraid of the one thing pilots do for a living. It's like wanting to be a fish but being afraid of water." The group's laughter was a living thing now, feeding on itself and growing stronger with each cruel observation. Someone in the back started a slow clap, mockingly congratulating Carla for her achievement. Another student began making airplane noises, complete with fake engine failure sounds and crash landings. Mitchell stepped closer, his voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a death sentence. "Miss Torres, I think it's clear that you may have misunderstood what pilot training involves. Perhaps we should discuss alternative career paths that might be more suited to your particular limitations." "She could be a great ground crew member," suggested one student. "Or maybe air traffic control," offered another. "At least those people stay safely on the ground." The suggestions came rapid fire now, each one designed to push Carla further from her dreams and deeper into humiliation. Bus driver, Uber driver, anything that kept her feet firmly planted on solid earth where people like her belonged. But as the mockery reached its crescendo, something shifted in Carla's posture. Her trembling hands slowly clenched into fists at her sides. Her breathing, while still shallow, became more controlled. And her eyes, those dark eyes that had remained fixed on the glass doors, suddenly lifted to meet Barnes' gaze directly. "I'll find another way," she said quietly. The laughter faltered for just a moment, confusion rippling through the group. Barnes' eyebrows rose slightly. "Another way to what, Miss Torres?" "To prove I belong here." The defiance in her voice was unexpected. a spark of resistance that caught everyone off guard. For just a moment, the predatory confidence of the group wavered as they processed this unexpected response from their victim, but the moment passed quickly. Brittany's laugh was the first to resume, sharper and more cutting than before. "Prove. You belong here," she repeated. "Honey, you just proved the exact opposite. The only thing you've demonstrated is that some people simply aren't cut out for the sky." As the group finally moved through the glass doors onto Cliff Point, leaving Carla standing alone in the corridor, their laughter echoed off the canyon walls like the cry of hunting birds. They had drawn first blood, and they could already taste victory, but none of them noticed the way Carla's fists remained clenched, or the steel that had entered her voice with those 4 simple words. None of them wondered what kind of person would travel across the country and pay full tuition to attend an elite flight school while harboring such an obvious fear, and none of them questioned why someone afraid of heights would be so determined to prove they belonged in the sky. The administration building buzzed with the energy of fresh scandal. Word of Carla's humiliation at Cliff Point had spread through Summit's halls like wildfire, carried by social media posts, whispered conversations, and the particular brand of excitement that comes from watching someone else's downfall. By the time she reached the registration office to complete her enrollment paperwork, her reputation had already been cemented. The charity case with acrophobia, who thought she could learn to fly. The registration area was designed to intimidate high ceilings, marble floors, and walls lined with photographs of Summit's most successful graduates. Military officers, commercial airline captains, aerobatic champions, and civilian pilots who had made names for themselves in various aviation fields. All of them shared certain characteristics: confident smiles, expensive equipment, and the unmistakable bearing of people born to privilege. Behind the mahogany registration desk sat Helen Blackwood, a stern woman in her 50s whose iron gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses gave her the appearance of a disapproving librarian. She had been at Summit for 15 years, and in that time, she had perfected the art of making unwelcome students feel appropriately unwelcome. Her desk nameplate read Senior Enrollment Coordinator, but everyone knew her real function was to serve as the Academy's gatekeeper, ensuring that only the right sort of people made it through the system, preparing and narrating this story. Took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Carla approached the desk with her folder of documents, the same quiet determination that had carried her through the morning's ordeals. Behind her, a growing crowd of students had gathered, drawn by the promise of more entertainment. Brittany Hunt held court near the leather seating area, her phone propped up on a marble side table as she live-streamed her commentary to thousands of followers. "Okay, so we're back with our aspiring pilot who's afraid of heights," Brittany narrated, her voice carrying clearly across the registration area. "She's about to try to actually enroll in flight training. This should be interesting." Helen Blackwood looked up from her computer screen with the expression of someone who had already been thoroughly briefed on the situation. Her eyes swept over Carla's appearance with obvious disapproval: the faded jacket, the worn jeans, the complete absence of designer accessories that marked Summit's typical clientele. "Miss Torres, I presume," Blackwood said, her voice carrying the particular chill that comes from years of practice in making people feel unwelcome. "I understand there were some issues during your orientation tour this morning." The phrasing was carefully chosen to maximize embarrassment. Around the registration area, conversations paused as students turned to listen. This wasn't just bureaucratic processing, it was public theater, with Carla cast as the unwilling star of her own humiliation. "I completed what I could of the tour," Carla replied evenly. Placing her folder on the desk, Blackwood opened the folder with the air of someone handling something distasteful. "Yes, well, before we proceed with registration, I think we need to address some concerns that have been raised about your suitability for our program." Marcus Webb Jr. stepped closer, his designer flight jacket bearing patches from Elite Aviation, clubs that his family's connections had secured for him. "Suitability is putting it kindly," he said loudly enough for his comment to be captured by the multiple phones recording the scene. "More like complete unsuitability. How do you think insurance companies feel about covering someone who's afraid of heights in flight training?" The question sent ripples of laughter through the gathering crowd. It was a reasonable concern wrapped in cruelty, the kind of logical-sounding attack that was impossible to defend against without seeming unreasonable. Blackwood nodded approvingly at Marcus's comment. "That's actually an excellent point, Miss Torres. Our insurance providers require all students to complete a psychological evaluation that includes specific assessments for aviation-related phobias. Given this morning's single quotes incident, I think it would be prudent to expedite that evaluation." She reached into her desk drawer and produced a thick packet of papers. "This is the Summit Aviation Institute's psychological fitness assessment. It's normally scheduled for later in the program, but under the circumstances." The implication hung in the air like smoke. This wasn't standard procedure. It was a targeted humiliation designed to force Carla to confront her apparent inadequacy in the most public and embarrassing way possible. "Some of these questions can be quite revealing," Blackwood continued, her voice taking on a mock-sympathetic tone. "For instance, there are detailed sections about specific phobias, anxiety disorders, and psychological barriers to high-altitude performance. I'm sure you understand the necessity." A new voice joined the chorus from the leather seating area. Dr. Patricia Vance, Summit's staff psychologist, had emerged from her office with impeccable timing. She was a thin woman with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a white coat that seemed designed to emphasize her clinical authority. "Helen, what seems to be the issue?" Dr. Vance asked, though her tone suggested she was already fully informed about the situation. "Dr. Vance, perfect timing," Blackwood replied. "Ms. Torres here appears to have some challenges with heights that we need to address before we can proceed with her enrollment." Dr. Vance approached with the measured pace of someone conducting a clinical examination. Her eyes studied Carla with the detached interest of a scientist observing a particularly interesting specimen. "Ms. Torres, acrophobia is actually quite common," she said, her voice carrying the patronizing kindness of someone delivering bad news to a child. "It affects approximately 3 to 5% of the population. There's no shame in it, but I'm afraid it does. Make certain career paths inadvisable." The clinical diagnosis delivered in public was like a scalpel cutting through any remaining dignity Carla might have possessed. Around the registration area, students began pulling out their phones to capture this expert confirmation of what they had all witnessed. "Could you describe your specific symptoms?" Dr. Vance continued, apparently oblivious to the audience hanging on every word. "Vertigo, nausea, panic attacks. Understanding the severity of your condition will help us recommend appropriate alternative programs." The questions were technically medical and appropriate, but delivered in this public setting, they became instruments of torture. Each symptom Dr. Vance listed prompted knowing nods and muffled laughter from the assembled students. Brittany's commentary to her followers became increasingly vicious. "This is honestly embarrassing for her," she narrated. "Imagine having your psychological issues diagnosed in public because you were delusional enough to think you could be a pilot. It's like watching someone discover they're allergic to water while trying to become a swimmer." Ryan Mitchell chose that moment to make his entrance, striding into the registration area with the bearing of someone arriving to deliver justice. His uniform was perfectly pressed, his jaw set in the expression of a man dealing with an unpleasant but necessary task. "Dr. Vance, Miss Blackwood," he said with a curt nod. "I trust we're addressing the situation from this morning?" "Indeed we are," Dr. Vance replied. "I was just explaining to Ms. Torres that acrophobia and aviation training are fundamentally incompatible. It's a safety issue as much as anything else." Mitchell's expression grew stern. "Safety is our top priority at Summit. We cannot and will not compromise student safety for the sake of political correctness or misguided inclusivity." The words hit like hammer blows. This wasn't just about Carla anymore. It was about protecting the institution, about maintaining standards, about ensuring that people like her knew their place in the natural order. "Miss Torres," Mitchell continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, "I think it's time we had an honest conversation about whether Summit Aviation Institute is really the right fit for your particular circumstances." The circle was closing now. Administrative authority, medical expertise, peer pressure, and social media documentation all aligned to deliver the same message. She didn't belong here. She had never belonged here, and everyone could see it except her. But as the voices around her grew louder and more confident in their judgment, Carla's response was the last thing any of them expected. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a second folder, one she hadn't shown to anyone yet. "Before we discuss alternatives," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade, "perhaps you should see these." The folder contained documents that none of them had expected: military medical clearances, psychological evaluations, and fitness assessments that painted a very different picture than the one they had constructed in their minds. The moment of confusion that Carla's mysterious documents created was brief but telling. Dr. Vance's eyes widened slightly as she scanned the papers, her clinical certainty wavering for the first time. Helen Blackwood's stern expression faltered as she tried to process what she was seeing. Even Ryan Mitchell's military bearing seemed to shift as he glimpsed official seals and signatures that commanded respect. But the moment passed quickly. Marcus Webb Jr., unable to see the documents from his position but sensing his entertainment slipping away, stepped forward with renewed aggression. "Whatever those papers say," he announced loudly, "they don't change what we all witnessed this morning. Documents can be faked, but fear is real." And we all saw her freeze up like a deer in headlights. The comment reignited the crowd's confidence. Phones resumed recording, social media feeds updated with fresh commentary, and the familiar rhythm of mockery resumed. Brittany Hunt seized the moment to regain control of the narrative. "Nice try with the paperwork," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "But we all have eyes. We all saw what happened at Cliff Point. You can't fake your way out of a phobia." Dr. Vance, professional composure restored, handed the documents back to Carla. "These are interesting," she said carefully, "but psychological conditions can develop over time. Previous clearances don't necessarily reflect current mental state." It was a masterful deflection, acknowledging the document's legitimacy while maintaining the narrative of Carla's inadequacy. The crowd murmured approvingly at this reasonable-sounding explanation. "Exactly," Mitchell said, his voice regaining its authoritative edge. "The only evaluation that matters is current performance. And current performance suggests significant issues that need to be addressed." With the immediate threat of the documents neutralized, the group's attention turned to the next phase of humiliation. The simulator building loomed ahead, a 5-story structure housing Summit's most advanced flight simulation equipment. It was here that students would spend countless hours learning to navigate the three-dimensional world of aviation. And it was here that Carla's fear of heights would be most severely tested. The building's design was deliberately intimidating. Glass elevators ran up the exterior walls, offering passengers a clear view of the increasing distance from the ground with each floor. The simulators themselves were housed in transparent pods that jutted out from the building's sides, suspended over the canyon like technological diving boards. As the group approached the building's entrance, Marcus couldn't resist orchestrating another public test. "Hey, Torres," he called out, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. "The advanced simulators are on the 5th floor. Think you can handle the elevator ride?" The question was designed to be a trap. If Carla refused to take the elevator, she would confirm her fear and provide more ammunition for mockery. If she attempted it and showed distress, she would give them an even more dramatic display of weakness to exploit. Brittany immediately understood the opportunity. "Oh my God, yes!" she exclaimed, pivoting her camera toward the glass elevators. "This is perfect content. Let's see if our aspiring pilot can even handle going up 5 floors in an elevator." The crowd pressed closer, sensing fresh entertainment. The glass elevators offered perfect visibility. Any sign of distress would be clearly visible to the assembled audience and the thousands of followers watching the live stream. Scott Barnes, who had been observing from a distance, chose this moment to rejoin the group. His timing, as always, was impeccable for maximizing Carla's discomfort. "Ms. Torres," he said, his voice carrying the weight of institutional authority, "I think it would be beneficial for you to visit our advanced simulation facilities. It will give you a realistic preview of what flight training actually entails." The suggestion was phrased as an educational opportunity, but everyone present understood its real purpose. This was a test designed to expose Carla's limitations in the most public and humiliating way possible. The group filed into the building's lobby, their excitement palpable. The glass elevators stood like transparent judgment chambers, their clear walls offering no privacy, no escape from scrutiny. The digital displays showed each elevator's current floor, making it impossible to hide from the reality of ascending height. "I'll take the stairs," Carla said quietly. The lobby erupted in laughter. It was the response they had hoped for, an immediate confirmation of weakness that validated everything they had said about her. "The stairs?" Marcus repeated, his voice filled with delighted disbelief. "To the 5th floor? Because you're afraid of a glass elevator?" "This is getting ridiculous," added another student. "How does someone afraid of glass elevators expect to handle sitting in a cockpit surrounded by windows at 30,000 feet? "Doctor." Vance stepped forward with her clinical authority. "Miss Torres, avoidance behavior is actually a classic symptom of acrophobia. The fact that you're unable to use the elevator confirms the severity of your condition." Brittany's commentary reached new heights of cruelty. "Guys, this is honestly painful to watch. She's literally choosing to climb 5 flights of stairs because she can't handle a normal elevator ride. Imagine explaining this to actual pilots. 'Hi, I'd like to fly planes, but elevators are too scary for me.' The stairwell became another stage for humiliation. As Carla began climbing, the group followed, their laughter echoing off the concrete walls. Each landing offered new opportunities for commentary, new angles for recording, new ways to document her apparent inadequacy. "Breathing hard already?" someone called out from behind. "Maybe this is good training for when she has to work ground." "Crew," suggested another dot by the 3rd floor. Carla's pace had slowed noticeably. Her breathing was labored, though whether from exertion or anxiety was unclear. Sweat beaded on her forehead, despite the building's air conditioning. The group's excitement grew with each sign of distress. Mitchell, who had taken the elevator to the 5th floor, was waiting when the group finally reached their destination. His presence there comfortable, relaxed, having taken the normal route served. As a stark contrast to Carla's difficult journey. "Ms. Torres," he said, checking his watch with theatrical precision, "you're 7 minutes behind the rest of the group. In aviation, timing is critical. 7 minutes can mean the difference between life and death." The simulator floor stretched. Out before them, a technological wonderland of advanced flight training equipment. But the most striking feature was the windows. Floor-to-ceiling glass panels offered an unobstructed view of Crimson Canyon, the ground far below visible in stark detail. For someone with acrophobia, it was a nightmare designed by engineers. Carla stopped dead in her tracks the moment she saw the view. Her face, already pale from the climb, became ashen. Her hands, which had remained steady throughout the morning's torments, began to tremble visibly. "Oh, this is perfect," Brittany breathed, her camera capturing every detail. "Look at her face. She's terrified, and she hasn't even gotten close to a simulator yet." The simulators themselves were suspended in transparent pods that extended beyond the building's edge, offering trainees the sensation of floating in midair. For Carla, approaching one would mean walking out over the abyss, enclosed only by glass and technology. "Miss Torres," Barnes said, his voice carrying across the simulator floor, "your assigned pod is number 7. It offers our most realistic flight experience, completely surrounded by windows for maximum immersion." Pod 7 was the most dramatically positioned, extending furthest from the building and offering the most spectacular and terrifying view of the canyon below. Reaching it would require walking across a glass bridge that stretched over empty air. The group watched with barely contained glee as Carla approached the bridge. Each step was visible through the transparent floor, each moment of hesitation captured by multiple cameras. This wasn't just entertainment, it was a public execution of dreams, witnessed by thousands and documented for posterity. Halfway across the bridge, Carla stopped. The wind outside whistled against the glass, the sound like whispered warnings about the fate of those who dared to fly too high. Below, the canyon floor waited with geological patience. "I can't," she whispered, the words barely audible but somehow carrying clearly in the sudden silence. The admission was like a gunshot in the quiet simulator bay. Carla Torres, the woman who had somehow convinced herself she could learn to fly, stood paralyzed on a glass bridge, defeated by the very element that defined aviation. But as the laughter began again, as the phones captured her moment of ultimate weakness, none of them noticed the way her fists clenched at her sides, or the steel that entered her eyes as she looked not down at the canyon, but up at the sky beyond the glass ceiling. The next morning brought new opportunities for humiliation, orchestrated with the precision of a military campaign. Word of Carla's simulator building breakdown had spread throughout Summit like wildfire, shared across social media platforms, and whispered through dormitory halls. By breakfast time, she had become a legend, the cautionary tale of what happened when someone reached too far beyond their capabilities. The day's training schedule called for tower climbing exercises, mandatory component of Summit's comprehensive pilot preparation program. The Institute's communications tower stretched 200 feet into the Utah sky, its steel framework offering an unforgiving test of nerve and physical capability. For most students, it was an exciting challenge. For someone with acrophobia, it promised to be the ultimate public humiliation. Ryan Mitchell had designed the morning's activities with particular care. The tower climb wasn't just about physical fitness, it was about confronting fear, about proving that Summit students could handle any challenge the aviation world might present. And for Carla Torres, it would be about providing final, incontrovertible proof that some people simply weren't meant to fly. The assembled group gathered at the base of the tower as the morning sun painted the steel structure in harsh relief against the desert sky. 20 students in matching training gear, their enthusiasm palpable as they prepared for what promised to be the most entertaining morning of their lives. At the center of the group, Brittany Hunt held court with her camera crew, a professional videographer she had flown in specifically to document what she was calling the final flight of the grounded bird. "Good morning, everyone," Mitchell announced, his voice carrying clearly across the group. "Today's exercise is designed to test your comfort with heights, your physical conditioning, and your ability to perform under pressure. All essential qualities for successful pilots." He gestured toward the tower, its communication array glinting in the sunlight. "The climb to the top platform requires approximately 30 minutes for the average student. Safety equipment is mandatory, but the psychological challenge remains significant." Carla stood at the edge of the group, her worn training gear marking her as an outsider among the designer athletic wear surrounding her. The documents from yesterday's confrontation had bought her a temporary reprieve from expulsion, but everyone knew this morning's exercise would settle the matter once and for all. Marcus Webb Jr. stepped forward with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his right to occupy any space he entered. Instructor Mitchell, given yesterday's incidents, should we be concerned about safety protocols? I mean, what happens if someone freezes halfway up? The question was designed to sound responsible while actually highlighting Carla's expected failure. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group, students nodding seriously as if genuinely concerned about safety rather than eagerly anticipating disaster. An excellent point, Mr. Webb, Mitchell replied approvingly. Which is why we'll be conducting this exercise in pairs. Each climber will have a partner responsible for monitoring their condition and, if necessary, calling for emergency assistance. Pairing system was announced with deliberate cruelty. Brittany Hunt volunteered immediately to be Carla's partner, her smile as sharp as broken glass. I think it's important that someone experienced keeps an eye on our ... challenged classmate, she said sweetly. Dr. Patricia Vance emerged from the medical station with impeccable timing, her clipboard and emergency equipment marking her as the official observer of what everyone expected to be a psychological breakdown. Miss Torres, she called out, her voice carrying the clinical detachment of someone preparing to document a predictable outcome. I'll need you to sign this additional waiver acknowledging the specific risks associated with your ... condition. The waiver was thick with legal language, but its message was clear. Summit was protecting itself from liability when Carla inevitably suffered a panic attack or worse during the climb. The act of signing it in front of the assembled group was another public acknowledgement of her inadequacy. Aviation journalist Lisa Park had positioned herself strategically with a clear view of both the tower and Carla's starting position. Her press credentials from Pilot Monthly magazine lent official weight to what was about to unfold. This wasn't just student hazing, it was news. A cautionary tale about the importance of proper screening in elite aviation programs. Miss Torres, Park called out, her recorder held prominently in her hand. Could you comment on your decision to attempt this exercise despite your documented fear of heights? What message do you think this sends to other aspiring pilots who might be struggling with similar challenges? The question was a masterpiece of journalistic cruelty, framed as legitimate inquiry while actually forcing Carla to either admit defeat or make promises she couldn't keep. Either answer would provide perfect material for the article that would undoubtedly appear in next month's magazine. Scott Barnes arrived as the group began their equipment checks, his presence adding institutional authority to the morning's proceedings. He surveyed the scene with the satisfaction of someone watching a problem solve itself. Ms. Torres, he said, approaching with the measured pace of an executioner, I want you to know that regardless of today's outcome, Summit appreciates your attempt. Sometimes the most valuable lesson is learning to recognize our limitations. The words were carefully chosen to sound supportive, while actually delivering a crushing blow to any remaining hope. This wasn't encouragement, it was a premature eulogy for dreams that were about to die very publicly. As the climbing began, Carla found herself paired with Brittany in what everyone understood to be a carefully orchestrated final act. The first 50 feet went surprisingly well, her movements steady and controlled despite the growing distance from the ground. But as they reached the tower's first platform, something shifted. The wind at this height was different, stronger, more insistent, carrying with it the whispered promise of what waited higher up. Carla's pace slowed noticeably, her breathing becoming labored in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. Everything okay down there? Brittany called out sweetly, her voice pitched perfectly for the microphones below. We can always turn back if this is too much for you. The offer was designed to sound helpful while actually highlighting Carla's distress. Below them, cameras tracked every movement, every sign of hesitation, every moment of apparent weakness. At the 100-foot mark, Carla stopped completely. Her hands gripped the safety rails with white-knuckled intensity, her face pale despite the morning warmth. The group below watched with fascination as their predictions seemed to come true in real time. "I can't look down," Carla whispered, her voice barely audible but somehow carrying clearly in the mountain air. "Can't look down?" Brittany repeated, ensuring her words would be captured by the recording equipment below. "Honey, pilots spend their entire careers looking down. That's literally the whole point of flying." The logic was unassailable, and everyone present knew it. Phone cameras zoomed in on Carla's face, capturing every detail of what appeared to be a complete psychological breakdown in progress. Dr. Vance's voice carried up from the medical station. "Ms. Torres, if you're experiencing symptoms of panic or disorientation, we need to begin emergency descent procedures immediately." The clinical terminology made everything sound official and medical, transforming personal failure into documented psychological incident. This wasn't just someone giving up, it was a patient experiencing a predictable response to stimulus beyond their capability. But as the group prepared for what seemed like inevitable rescue operations, Carla's response surprised everyone. Instead of calling for help or beginning descent, she closed her eyes and began taking slow, controlled breaths. "What's she doing?" Someone called from below. "Probably having a breakdown," another voice suggested. But Mitchell, watching through binoculars, saw something different. The trembling in Carla's hands wasn't random, it was controlled, rhythmic, like someone working through a familiar routine. "Interesting," he murmured, though his tone suggested confusion rather than approval. After what seemed like an eternity, Carla opened her eyes and resumed climbing. Her pace was different now, slower but more deliberate, as if she had found some internal resource that hadn't been there before. Brittany's commentary became increasingly frustrated as her predicted dramatic breakdown failed to materialize. "She's just continuing to climb," she reported to her followers, disappointment clear in her voice. By the time they reached the communication array at the tower's peak, Carla had transformed from victim to puzzle. She had completed the climb, but her obvious distress throughout the ascent had provided enough material for weeks of mockery. Standing on the platform 200 feet above the desert floor, with the wind whipping around the steel structure and the ground far below, Carla Torres looked out over the landscape with an expression no one could quite read. "Congratulations," Brittany said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "You made it up. Now you just have to make it down." But as Carla turned to face the descent, her eyes held something that hadn't been there during the climb, a strange kind of peace, as if she had found something she had been looking for in the thin air and endless sky. The confusion Carla's tower climb had created among her tormentors was short-lived. By afternoon, the narrative had been reshaped to fit their expectations. She had completed the climb through stubborn determination rather than genuine capability. And her obvious distress throughout the exercise only confirmed her fundamental unsuitability for aviation. The consensus was clear: it was time to end this charade once and for all. The evaluation simulator was Summit's most advanced training equipment, a marvel of technology that could replicate any flight condition imaginable. Housed in a transparent pod that extended dramatically from the building's edge, it offered complete immersion in the flying experience. For legitimate students, it was an exciting challenge. For Carla Torres, it had been carefully designed to become an instrument of final humiliation. Marcus Webb Jr. had arrived early to the simulator bay, his family's connections providing him with access that ordinary students didn't enjoy. The technician on duty, a young man whose job depended on keeping wealthy families happy, had been surprisingly accommodating when Marcus explained his concerns about safety protocols for students with psychological issues. "We just want to make sure the evaluation is comprehensive," Marcus had explained with the easy charm of someone accustomed to getting his way. "Maybe increase the turbulence settings a bit. test her response to emergency scenarios. You know, for safety reasons. The modifications were subtle, but devastating. Enhanced motion sensitivity that would amplify any movement. Increased visual distortion during simulated turbulence. Audio feedback calibrated to create maximum disorientation. Most crucially, the emergency descent protocols had been altered to trigger automatically at the slightest sign of pilot distress, ensuring that any hesitation would result in immediate and very public failure. Brittany Hunt had positioned her camera crew with military precision, covering every angle of the simulator pod. Her live stream had attracted record viewership, with thousands of followers tuning in to witness what she had promoted as the final flight. Will our grounded bird finally crash? Dr. Patricia Vance arrived with her emergency medical kit and a fresh stack of psychological evaluation forms. Her presence lent clinical legitimacy to what was about to unfold, transforming entertainment into medical documentation. Ms. Torres, Dr. Vance announced, her voice carrying across the simulator bay. Given the unique circumstances of your evaluation, I'll be monitoring your vital signs throughout the exercise. Any signs of panic attack, disorientation, or psychological distress will result in immediate termination of the test. The medical monitoring was presented as a safety precaution, but everyone understood its real purpose: to provide official documentation of Carla's breakdown when it inevitably occurred. Ryan Mitchell emerged from the control room with Scott Barnes, both men wearing expressions of grim duty. This wasn't just an evaluation, it was an intervention, a necessary action to protect both Carla and the institution from the consequences of misguided ambition. Ms. Torres, Barnes said, his voice carrying the weight of institutional authority. Today's evaluation will test your ability to handle standard flight operations under normal conditions. The scenario is a simple navigation exercise from Salt Lake City to Phoenix. Weather conditions are moderate, traffic is light, and the aircraft is a standard Cessna Citation. The description made it sound routine, almost boring. No one mentioned the hidden modifications, the enhanced sensitivity settings, or the automatic failure protocols that had been programmed into the system. Lisa Park positioned herself with a clear view of both the simulator controls and Carla's face. Her article was already half written in her mind. When Dreams Meet Reality, a cautionary tale from Summit Aviation Institute. The only thing missing was the dramatic conclusion that everyone knew was coming. As Carla approached the simulator pod, her movement across the glass bridge drew the same gasps and commentary that had marked her previous attempts. But this time, something was different. Her pace was steady, her breathing controlled, her expression focused rather than fearful. Interesting, Mitchell murmured to Barnes. She seems more composed today. Probably medicated, Barnes replied dismissively. Some people will try anything to avoid facing reality. The suggestion rippled through the assembled crowd, adding another layer of illegitimacy to whatever performance was about to unfold. If she succeeded, it would be due to artificial chemical assistance rather than genuine capability. Carla settled into the simulator's pilot seat with movements that seemed almost familiar, her hands finding the controls with surprising ease. The crowd pressed closer to the observation windows, eager to witness the moment when reality would finally shatter her delusions. Beginning evaluation, Mitchell announced into his headset. Ms. Torres, you have control. Taxi to runway 27. Request takeoff clearance and proceed according to your flight plan. The first few minutes proceeded normally. Carla's responses were appropriate, her communication clear, her control inputs smooth. The crowd's excitement began to shift toward confusion as their expected dramatic opening failed to materialize. She's actually doing okay, someone whispered, disappointment clear in their voice. Just wait, Marcus replied confidently. We haven't gotten to the good parts yet. The turbulence began at 8,000 feet, sudden and violent as the modified system engaged. The simulator pod shook with intensity, far beyond what the weather conditions should have produced. Through the observation windows, the crowd could see Carla, gripping the controls as the aircraft bucked and rolled. "There we go," Brittany narrated excitedly to her camera. "She's starting to lose it now. Look at how white her knuckles are getting." But Carla's response wasn't what they had expected. Instead of panic, she seemed to settle deeper into the pilot's seat, her movements becoming more precise rather than more erratic. Her voice over the radio remained calm as she requested altitude changes to escape the turbulence. In the control room, Mitchell frowned at his instruments. "Increase the motion sensitivity," he ordered the technician. "Sir, it's already at maximum safe levels," the young man replied nervously. "Override the safety limits." The simulator's motion became violent, far beyond anything a real aircraft would experience in normal flight conditions. The pod shook so severely that observers could hear the metal joints creaking under stress. Surely this would break Carla's concentration, trigger the panic response that would justify her removal from the program. Instead, something extraordinary happened. As the artificial turbulence reached its peak, Carla's hands moved across the controls with fluid precision, her responses not just appropriate, but masterful. She wasn't fighting the aircraft, she was dancing with it, using the violent motion to execute maneuvers that should have been impossible in such conditions. "What the hell is she doing?" Mitchell demanded, his voice tight with confusion. The answer came from an unexpected source. Colonel Amanda Foster had entered the simulator bay unnoticed, her Air Force uniform immediately commanding attention and respect. She had been watching the evaluation from the back of the room, her expression growing increasingly grave as she observed what was happening. "She's flying," Foster said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the suddenly silent room. "Actually flying, not just surviving the turbulence using it." The observation sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. This wasn't the breakdown they had anticipated. This was competence on a level that none of them had expected or wanted to see. But Marcus wasn't finished. With a gesture to the technician, he triggered the final modification, a catastrophic system failure that would require immediate emergency procedures. Multiple alarms screamed through the simulator as engines failed, hydraulics died, and electrical systems shut down one by one. "Emergency descent required," the automated system announced. "Pilot response inadequate. Initiating automatic termination." The words echoed through the simulator bay like a death sentence. The evaluation was over, officially terminated due to pilot failure to respond appropriately to emergency conditions. Carla Torres had been defeated not by her own limitations, but by technology itself declaring her unfit. As the simulator powered down and the pod's canopy opened, Carla sat motionless for a moment, her hands still on the controls, her expression unreadable. Around her, the crowd began to recover its voice, relief and satisfaction mixing as the expected outcome finally materialized. "System failure," Mitchell announced with professional detachment. "Evaluation terminated due to inadequate emergency response procedures." But Colonel Foster was already moving toward the control room, her expression dark with suspicion and growing anger. Something about this evaluation didn't feel right, and she intended to find out exactly what had happened. In that simulator, the aftermath of the simulator evaluation unfolded with the ritualistic precision of a public execution. Within minutes of the official failure announcement, Ryan Mitchell had summoned Carla to his office for what everyone understood to be the final administrative procedure, the formal termination of her enrollment, and the ceremonial destruction of her dreams. Mitchell's office was designed to intimidate, with its wall-mounted displays of military commendations, photographs with high-ranking officials, and models of various aircraft he had flown during his Navy career. Behind his mahogany desk, framed certificates proclaimed his qualifications and achievements, while floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of Summit's facilities and the canyon beyond. Carla sat in the visitor's chair deliberately, positioned lower than Mitchell's imposing executive seat, while a crowd gathered outside the glass walls. Word had spread quickly through Summit's halls that the final act of the Torres drama was about to unfold, and students had abandoned their afternoon classes to witness the conclusion of what had become the Academy's most entertaining spectacle. Brittany Hunt held court near the office entrance, her camera crew capturing every moment for her record-breaking livestream. The viewership numbers had climbed throughout the day, with aviation forums and social media platforms sharing her content as a cautionary tale about the importance of proper screening in elite flight programs. "This is it, everyone," Brittany narrated to her followers, her voice carrying the excitement of someone announcing the finale of a particularly satisfying drama. "After days of watching this train wreck in slow motion, we're finally about to see the official end. I have to say, it's been educational watching someone learn the hard way that some dreams are just too big for some people." Dr. Patricia Vance had positioned herself strategically outside the office, her medical bag and psychological evaluation forms, ready to document what she expected to be an emotional breakdown. Her presence lent clinical legitimacy to the proceedings, transforming personal failure into a case study in the importance of proper psychological screening. Scott Barnes emerged from the administrative wing with Helen Blackwood, both carrying folders thick with official documents. Their expressions carried the weight of institutional duty. This wasn't personal vindictiveness, but the necessary protection of Summit's reputation and standards. Through the office windows, the assembled crowd could see Mitchell arranging documents on his desk with deliberate ceremony. Carla's original application sat prominently in the center, alongside the failed evaluation reports, medical assessments, and incident documentation that had accumulated over her brief time at Summit. "Miss Torres," Mitchell began, his voice carrying the formal tone of someone delivering an official verdict. "After careful review of your performance during the evaluation period, Summit Aviation Institute has determined that continuation in our program would not be in your best interests or ours." The words were carefully chosen to sound reasonable and protective rather than punitive. This wasn't punishment, it was intervention, a necessary action to prevent further damage to both Carla and the institution. Lisa Park had secured a position where her recording equipment could capture both the office proceedings and the crowd's reactions. Her article was already taking shape in her mind, complete with quotes about institutional responsibility and the dangers of lowering standards in the name of inclusivity. "The specific incidents," Mitchell continued, consulting his notes with theatrical precision, "include documented acrophobia manifestations during orientation, inability to complete standard facility tours, performance anxiety during training exercises, and most significantly, failure to complete emergency response procedures during simulator evaluation." Each item was read aloud like an indictment, the official language transforming personal struggles into institutional failures. Around the office, phones recorded every word, social media feeds updating in real time with commentary that grew more vicious with each detail. Marcus Webb Jr. had positioned himself where his reactions would be clearly visible to the cameras. His expression carried the satisfied vindication of someone whose predictions had been proven correct, mixed with the particular brand of smugness that came from watching justice served. "Furthermore," Mitchell said, reaching for Carla's application with deliberate slowness, "the psychological evaluations conducted by Dr. Vance indicate underlying conditions that are fundamentally incompatible with aviation careers. Continuing this charade would be cruel to you and dangerous to others." The psychological diagnosis delivered in public was the final nail in the coffin of legitimacy. This wasn't just institutional judgment, it was medical fact, scientific determination of inadequacy that no amount of determination could overcome. But as Mitchell prepared to deliver the coup de grace, the formal tearing of her application that would symbolize the destruction of her dreams, An unexpected interruption changed the trajectory of the entire proceeding. Colonel Foster burst through the office door without ceremony, her Air Force uniform immediately commanding respect and attention. Behind her followed two technicians from the simulator bay, their expressions grave as they carried computer printouts and data recordings. "Stop this proceeding immediately," Foster commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. The office fell silent, the dramatic momentum suddenly derailed by military intervention. Mitchell's hand froze halfway to Carla's application, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion. "Colonel Foster," Barnes said carefully, "this is an internal academy matter." "I'm not sure. You're not sure of a lot of things," Foster cut him off, her voice sharp as a blade. "Including what actually happened in that simulator evaluation." She gestured to the technicians, who began spreading their printouts across Mitchell's desk. The data they revealed painted a very different picture than the official failure report suggested. According to these readings, one technician explained nervously, the simulator was operating at 300% normal motion sensitivity. The emergency scenarios were programmed to trigger automatically regardless of pilot response. And the system failure that terminated the evaluation was manually initiated from the control room. The silence that followed was deafening. Around the office, the assembled crowd pressed closer to the windows, straining to hear details that would reshape everything they thought they knew about the evaluation. "In other words," Foster continued, her voice carrying clearly through the office and into the hallway beyond, "this evaluation was sabotaged. Ms. Torres wasn't tested, she was set up to fail." Brittany's live stream faltered for the first time all week, her commentary trailing off as she processed information that didn't fit the narrative she had been crafting. Social media feeds fell silent as followers tried to understand what they were witnessing. Mitchell's face had gone pale, his earlier confidence evaporating as the weight of Foster's accusations settled over the room. "Colonel, I think there may be some misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," Foster interrupted, "is mine. I misunderstood how far this institution would go to maintain its precious exclusivity." She turned to face Carla, her expression softening slightly. "Miss Torres, I think it's time these people learned exactly who they've been torturing for the past week." The words hung in the air like a promise and a threat. In the hallway, cameras continued recording, but the narrative had shifted in ways that no one could have predicted. Whatever was about to be revealed would change everything, not just for Carla Torres, but for everyone who had participated in her humiliation. Barnes stepped forward, his voice carrying a note of desperation. "Colonel Foster, whatever you think." "You know, I know exactly what I know," Foster replied. "And tomorrow morning, at the VIP demonstration flight, everyone else will know it too." The announcement hit the crowd like a thunderbolt. The VIP demonstration was Summit's most prestigious event, attended by military officials, aerospace executives, and aviation media from around the world. It was where the Academy showcased its finest achievements and most promising students. "Ms. Torres won't be attending that demonstration," Mitchell said firmly. "Her enrollment has been terminated." Foster's smile was cold as winter sky. "Oh, she be attending. Just not in the way any of you expect." As the crowd began to disperse, buzzing with confusion and speculation, Carla quietly gathered her belongings. Her expression remained unreadable, but there was something different in her posture, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. The departure that everyone had expected to be the end of her story was beginning to feel like something else entirely. Tomorrow's demonstration promised to reveal truths that would reshape everything Summit's elite thought they knew about power, privilege, and the right to fly. Dawn broke over Summit Aviation Institute with the crisp clarity that only comes to the high desert, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson. The VIP demonstration day had arrived with all the pageantry befitting Summit's most prestigious annual event. Corporate jets lined the expanded tarmac like gleaming trophies, their logos representing the most powerful names in aerospace, defense, and civilian aviation. The guest list read like a who's who of American aviation. Elite. Pentagon officials arrived in military transports, their uniforms bearing stars and ribbons that commanded instant respect. Aerospace executives emerged from private jets worth more than most people's houses, their presence representing billions. In government contracts and civilian aircraft sales, aviation journalists from every major publication had gathered to document Summit's continued excellence in training the next generation of elite pilots. The main viewing area had been transformed into an outdoor amphitheater, with tiered seating offering optimal views of both the runway and the dramatic canyon beyond. Champagne flutes caught the morning sunlight as servers moved through crowds of guests whose casual conversations involved corporate acquisitions, military procurement decisions, and the kind of generational wealth that treated aircraft like luxury cars. Brittany Hunt had secured premium positioning for her camera crew, her livestream now attracting international attention as aviation enthusiasts worldwide tuned in to witness Summit's most exclusive demonstration. Her social media following had exploded overnight, with millions of viewers drawn by her promotion of the event as the ultimate display of elite aviation excellence. "Good morning, everyone," she narrated to her global audience, her voice carrying the excitement of someone at the center of a major media event. "Welcome to Summit Aviation Institute's annual VIP demonstration, where the future of aviation takes flight. We've got some incredible student performances planned, showcasing the kind of talent that only Summit can produce." Ryan Mitchell stood at the podium, his dress uniform immaculate as he prepared to address the assembled dignitaries. Behind him, a line of Summit's finest students waited in their matching flight suits, each representing years of elite training and family connections worth hundreds of millions of dollars. "Distinguished guests," Mitchell began, his voice carrying clearly through the morning air, "today you will witness demonstrations of the exceptional skill and character that define Summit Aviation Institute graduates. These young aviators represent the future of American aerospace dominance." The program had been carefully choreographed to impress aerobatic performances by trust fund beneficiaries flying million-dollar aircraft, formation flights by students whose families owned major airlines, precision maneuvers executed with the kind of casual excellence that only unlimited resources could provide. But as Mitchell prepared to introduce the first performance, an unexpected sound began to penetrate the morning calm. Low at first, barely audible above the ambient noise of the crowd and the distant hum of civilian aircraft. Then growing stronger, more insistent, carrying with it a quality that made conversation falter and heads turn skyward. It was the sound of military power approaching at high speed. Colonel Foster, who had positioned herself near the VIP section with other Pentagon officials, was the first to identify what was coming. Her expression shifted from casual attention to sharp focus as she recognized the distinctive signature of an aircraft that shouldn't have been anywhere near a civilian demonstration. "What the hell is that?" muttered General Michael Carter, Foster's superior, as he raised binoculars toward the eastern horizon. The answer came as a silver blur that materialized from the canyon's depths, like a missile launched from the Earth itself. An F-22 Raptor, the most advanced fighter jet in the American arsenal, emerged from Crimson Canyon at an altitude so low that its passage created visible shockwaves in the morning air. The crowd's reaction was immediate and electric. Conversations died mid-sentence as thousands of eyes tracked the aircraft's impossible trajectory. This wasn't part of the program. Nothing in the civilian demonstration should have involved active military hardware, especially not the Air Force's most classified fighter platform. The Raptor's approach defied every conventional rule of safe flying. It skimmed the canyon walls with clearance measured in feet rather than the hundreds of meters required by standard protocols. Its passage through the narrow gorge was a masterpiece of precision flying that pushed both aircraft and pilot to the absolute limits of capability. But what happened next transformed impressive flying into something approaching the miraculous. As the F-22 emerged from the canyon's narrowest point, it suddenly inverted, rolling until it flew completely upside down while maintaining its trajectory just above the canyon floor. The maneuver was executed with such smoothness that it seemed almost casual, as if defying gravity and physics was simply another routine procedure. The inverted flight through the canyon lasted exactly 90 seconds. 90 seconds of impossible flying that carved itself into the memory of everyone who witnessed it. The Raptor's passage created a thunderous echo that reverberated off the canyon walls, like the voice of some aerial god announcing its presence to mere mortals below. Security personnel scrambled into action, their radios crackling with urgent communications as they tried to identify the unauthorized aircraft. FAA officials demanded explanations that no one could provide. Pentagon representatives grabbed phones to contact NORAD and determine whether this was some kind of training exercise gone wrong. But the crowd's attention remained fixed on the sky as the F-22 completed its canyon passage and began to climb toward the demonstration area. The aircraft's movements carried an almost predatory grace, its stealth configuration making it appear to shimmer in and out of visibility. Like a mechanical phantom, Brittany's livestream had erupted into chaos, with viewer counts spiking into the millions as word of the unexpected military display spread across social media platforms. Her commentary had devolved into breathless exclamations as she tried to process what she was witnessing. "This is incredible," she gasped into her camera. "We've got an actual F-22 Raptor performing what I can only describe as impossible maneuvers. I have no idea if this is part of the demonstration or some kind of emergency, but this is the most insane flying I've ever seen." The Raptor's approach to Summit's airspace was a study in controlled aggression. 3 precision passes over the facility, each one lower and faster than regulation should have permitted. The aircraft's presence transformed the civilian demonstration into something approaching a military airshow, its raw power dwarfing the elegant civilian performances that had been planned. On the 3rd pass, the F-22 executed a maneuver that sent gasps through the crowd. A vertical climb directly over the viewing area, followed by a controlled stall that left the aircraft hanging motionless in the sky for what seemed like an impossible moment. Then a graceful recovery that brought it back to level flight as if the laws of physics were merely suggestions to be ignored at will. But the most stunning moment came as the Raptor approached Summit's main runway. Instead of the standard military landing pattern, the aircraft executed a series of combat maneuvers that belonged in a war zone rather than a civilian airfield. Barrel rolls, knife-edge passes, and high G-turns that would have been impressive in an aerobatic competition, but were virtually unheard of in operational military aircraft. The landing itself was a masterpiece of precision. The F-22 touched down on Summit's runway with the gentleness of a feather, its advanced systems allowing for approaches that would challenge even the most experienced civilian pilots. As the aircraft rolled to a stop near the main viewing area, the sudden silence that followed its engine shutdown was almost as stunning as the performance that had preceded it. Security vehicles surrounded the aircraft immediately, their personnel maintaining careful distance from the still-hot engines and advanced systems. Pentagon officials rushed toward the scene, their expressions mixing confusion with professional concern about the unauthorized use of classified military equipment. But as the F-22's canopy began to open with a mechanical hiss that carried clearly in the desert air, the identity of the pilot remained hidden behind the reflective visor of a standard military flight helmet. The figure that emerged from the cockpit moved with the practiced efficiency of someone for whom such aircraft were familiar tools rather than miraculous machines. It was only as the pilot removed their helmet, releasing a cascade of dark hair, that caught the morning sunlight, that the crowd began to understand the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. The woman who had been mocked, humiliated, and dismissed as a charity case with acrophobia stood beside the most advanced fighter jet in the world. Her flight suit bearing insignia and patches that spoke of achievements beyond the comprehension of Summit's privileged elite. Captain Carla Torres had returned to deliver a lesson that none of them would ever forget. The silence that followed Carla's emergence from the F-22 cockpit was the kind of absolute quiet that precedes earthquakes, a moment of stillness before the world reshapes itself around a new and terrible understanding. 10,000 eyes fixed on the woman who had just executed flying maneuvers that belonged in combat zones, not civilian demonstrations, while their minds struggled to reconcile what they were seeing with what they thought they knew. General Michael Carter was the first to break the spell, striding across the tarmac with the purposeful pace of someone accustomed to command. His 4-star uniform caught the morning sunlight as he approached the F-22, his expression carrying a mixture of pride and barely controlled fury that sent ripples of unease through the assembled crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," Carter's voice boomed across the demonstration area, amplified by the public address system and carrying clearly to every corner of the viewing stands. "Allow me to introduce Captain Carla Torres, callsign Phantom, former commander of the 94th Fighter Squadron Stealth Hawks Division." The words hit the crowd like physical blows, each credential landing with devastating precision. The woman they had mocked as a charity case with acrophobia stood beside the most advanced fighter jet in the world, her achievements suddenly recontextualizing every moment of humiliation she had endured. Brittany Hunt's livestream had descended into chaos, her viewer count climbing past 5 million as aviation enthusiasts worldwide shared the stream across social media platforms. Her earlier commentary about the grounded bird now played in stark contrast to the reality unfolding before her cameras. "This can't be real," she whispered into her microphone, her earlier confidence completely shattered. "The woman we've been. The woman who was afraid of heights. She just flew an F-22 through a canyon upside down." Colonel Foster stepped forward, her own uniform bearing decorations that commanded respect from even the most elite civilian gathering. Her voice carried the clinical precision of someone delivering a military briefing, each fact another nail in the coffin of Summit's narrative. "Captain Torres holds the record for the most combat flight hours in F-22 operations," Foster announced, her words carrying clearly across the stunned assembly. "She has completed 847 combat missions over hostile territory, including the classified Operation Desert Phantom, where she flew continuous combat air patrol for 18 hours during the evacuation of Kandahar." The aviation journalists in the crowd began frantically taking notes, their earlier dismissive articles about unsuitable candidates suddenly transformed into documentation of their own professional failure. Lisa Park's recorder captured every detail of what was becoming the biggest aviation story of the decade. General Carter continued the recitation of achievements that painted an increasingly devastating picture of Summit's judgment. "Captain Torres is the only pilot ever to successfully execute a combat landing on a damaged carrier deck in an F-22 during active hostilities. She holds advanced certifications in high-altitude reconnaissance, extreme weather operations, and classified stealth penetration techniques." Each credential was like a surgical strike against the assumptions that had guided Summit's treatment of her. The woman afraid of glass elevators had routinely operated aircraft at altitudes where the sky turns black and the curvature of the earth becomes visible. The person who couldn't cross a transparent bridge had performed carrier landings in conditions that challenged the limits of human capability. Dr. Patricia Vance stood frozen near the medical station, her psychological evaluation forms suddenly seeming like artifacts from another reality. Her clinical diagnosis of acrophobia delivered with such certainty, just days before now appeared as professional malpractice of the highest order. Furthermore, Foster added, her voice taking on an edge that suggested personal investment in the proceedings, Captain Torres is the recipient of the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters, and the Presidential Unit Citation for actions that remain classified at the highest levels of national security. The crowd's reaction evolved from stunned silence to audible gasps as the magnitude of their error became clear. These weren't just impressive credentials, they represented a level of achievement that placed Carla Torres among the most elite pilots in American military history. Ryan Mitchell stood near the podium like a man watching his career implode in real time. His earlier confident dismissal of Carla's capabilities now seemed not just wrong, but criminally negligent. The simulator evaluation that he had overseen rigged to ensure her failure had attempted to humiliate someone whose flying skills surpassed his own by orders of magnitude. But perhaps most relevant to recent events, General Carter continued, his voice taking on a tone that made even seasoned military officers straighten their postures. Captain Torres pioneered the canyon penetration techniques currently used by Special Operations Forces for low-altitude infiltration missions. The implications hit the crowd like a thunderbolt. The woman who had been mocked for her fear of heights had literally written the manual on flying through narrow canyon passages at altitudes that would terrify commercial pilots. The inverted flight they had just witnessed wasn't a stunt, it was a demonstration of techniques she had developed for combat operations in the world's most dangerous airspace. Marcus Webb Jr. had gone pale, his earlier smugness replaced by the dawning realization that his family's aerospace connections were meaningless in the face of genuine expertise. The company his grandfather had founded built aircraft that Carla Torres had taken into combat, using them to accomplish missions that existed only in classified files. Scott Barnes emerged from the crowd, his institutional authority suddenly seeming fragile and hollow. His approach to where Carla stood beside the F-22 was the walk of a man facing professional extinction. Captain Torres, he began, his voice carrying none of its earlier confidence. I think there may have been some misunderstanding. Director Barnes, Carla interrupted, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to command in life or death situations. The only misunderstanding was mine. I underestimated how far Summit would go to maintain its culture of exclusion. Her words carried clearly across the demonstration area, captured by dozens of cameras and broadcast live to millions of viewers worldwide. This wasn't just a personal confrontation, it was a public reckoning with institutional prejudice at the highest levels. Colonel Foster produced a tablet displaying official military records, her voice taking on the tone of someone reading charges at a court-martial. Captain Torres's most recent assignment involved training Air Force Academy instructors in advanced flight techniques. She was specifically recruited by the Pentagon to improve the quality of military aviation education. The irony was devastating and intentional. The woman Summit had rejected as unqualified had been tasked by the highest levels of military command with improving the training of the next generation of military pilots. In fact, General Carter added with the precision of someone delivering a killing blow. Captain Torres was conducting an undercover assessment of civilian aviation training standards when she enrolled at Summit. Her mission was to evaluate whether elite civilian institutions were maintaining the professional standards necessary for potential military recruitment. The revelation transformed everything. Carla's enrollment hadn't been the desperate dream of an unqualified outsider. It had been an official military evaluation of Summit's competence and character. And Summit had failed that evaluation in the most spectacular and public way possible. As the implications settled over the crowd like fallout from a nuclear explosion, one final detail emerged that completed the picture of institutional failure. Captain Torres hadn't just been assessing Summit's training standards, she had been evaluating Whether the Academy deserved continued recognition from the Department of Defense, the recognition that brought Summit prestige, government contracts, and access to military recruitment programs. The recognition that Scott Barnes had just jeopardized through his treatment of one of the Air Force's most distinguished pilots. In the distance, media helicopters circled like vultures, their cameras capturing every moment of what had become aviation's most public humiliation. Summit's reputation, built over decades of careful cultivation, was collapsing in real time as the world watched its elite students and faculty confront the consequences of their assumptions. But Captain Carla Torres wasn't finished delivering lessons. As she turned toward the podium where Summit's leadership stood in various stages of shock and denial, her expression carried the calm resolve of someone who had faced enemy fire and emerged victorious. The reckoning was only beginning. Captain Carla Torres approached the podium with the measured pace of someone who had walked across aircraft carrier decks in hostile waters, her flight suit bearing patches and insignia that represented achievements beyond the comprehension of Summit's privileged elite. Behind her, the F-22 Raptor sat like a sleeping predator, its presence transforming the civilian demonstration into something approaching a military tribunal. The crowd had fallen into the kind of absolute silence that accompanies moments of historical significance. Millions of viewers worldwide watched through live streams and news feeds as one of America's most distinguished combat pilots prepared to address the institution that had attempted to humiliate her. The aviation world held its breath, sensing that whatever happened next would reshape conversations about merit, privilege, and the right to fly. "Director Barnes," Carla began, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to command. "In crisis situations, yesterday you questioned my suitability for aviation training. Today, I'm questioning yours for running an institution that claims to develop pilots." Her words carried clearly across the demonstration area, captured by dozens of cameras and broadcast live to millions of viewers. This wasn't just personal confrontation, it was professional, judgment being rendered in the most public forum possible. Barnes stepped forward, his earlier confidence replaced by the desperate bearing of someone watching their career implode. "Captain Torres, if you had known, you would have treated me differently," Carla interrupted, her tone carrying the precision of someone delivering a tactical briefing. "But that's exactly the problem. Your evaluation of my capabilities was based on my appearance, my background, and your assumptions about who deserves to fly, none of which had anything to do with actual competence." The observation sent ripples through the assembled VIP crowd. Corporate executives and military officials who had spent the morning enjoying Summit's hospitality now found themselves witnessing an institutional autopsy performed in real time. Carla's attention turned to Ryan Mitchell, whose dress uniform suddenly seemed like a costume rather than a symbol of authority. "Instructor Mitchell, you told me that some people aren't meant for the sky. I'm curious, exactly how many combat missions have you flown?" The question hung in the air like a guided missile seeking its target. Mitchell's face flushed as he realized that his entire authority structure was about to collapse under scrutiny from someone whose achievements dwarfed his own. "Captain Torres, my service record: 14 transport missions," Carla stated, her voice carrying the clinical precision of someone reading official records, "all in non-combat zones. Your total flight time in hostile airspace: 0 hours. 0 minutes. The contrast was devastating. The man who had judged her unfit for aviation had never faced the kind of challenges that Carla navigated routinely. His authority over flight training suddenly seemed not just questionable, but absurd. Dr. Patricia Vance found herself in Carla's crosshairs next, her clinical expertise about to be dissected by someone who had undergone psychological evaluations at the highest levels of military clearance. "Dr. Vance, you diagnosed me with acrophobia based on my reaction to civilian observation platforms," Carla said, her tone carrying the measured cadence of someone presenting evidence. Yet my psychological profile includes successful completion of high-altitude, low-opening parachute training, carrier qualifications requiring landings on platforms suspended above open ocean, and regular operations at altitudes where cabin pressure becomes a life-or-death concern. The medical diagnosis that had seemed so authoritative just days before now appeared as professional malpractice. Vance's clinical certainty crumbled as the evidence mounted against her rushed judgment. Furthermore, Carla continued, producing a tablet displaying official military medical records. My last psychological evaluation was conducted by Air Force medical personnel specifically trained in aviation psychology. Their conclusion: exceptional stress tolerance and superior performance under extreme conditions. Brittany Hunt, whose social media empire had been built on documenting Carla's supposed failures, found herself facing the collapse of her carefully constructed narrative. Her live-stream audience watched in real time as the woman she had mocked demonstrated competence that made her own privileged background seem trivial by comparison. "Ms. Hunt," Carla said, turning toward where Brittany stood with her camera crew, "you've spent the week documenting what you called my failures. I'm curious about your own qualifications to judge aviation capability." Brittany's response was barely audible. "I have a private pilot's license. Flight hours? About 40. The admission was devastating. The woman who had appointed herself judge of aviation competence had less flying experience than many high school students. Her social media authority suddenly seemed not just hollow, but embarrassingly inadequate. Marcus Webb Jr. stepped forward, his family connections suddenly seeming like anchors rather than assets. "Captain Torres, our families have contributed to aviation development for generations, Mr. Webb." Carla interrupted, her voice carrying the edge of someone who had earned rather than inherited their position. "Your grandfather's company builds aircraft. I take them into combat. Your family writes checks. I write after-action reports that become classified documents. Your contribution to aviation is financial. Mine involves risking my life to protect American interests at altitudes where mistakes mean death." The distinction between inherited privilege and earned expertise couldn't have been clearer. Marcus's wealth meant nothing in the face of Carla's demonstrated competence under the most extreme conditions possible. General Carter stepped forward, his four-star uniform commanding attention from even the most privileged civilian gathering. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you've witnessed today is the consequence of institutional prejudice overriding professional judgment. Captain Torres's evaluation of Summit Aviation Institute has been concluded. The military terminology transformed. The morning's events from personal drama into official assessment. This hadn't been entertainment. It had been a Pentagon evaluation of civilian aviation training standards, and Summit had failed catastrophically. The Department of Defense will be reviewing all current partnerships with institutions that demonstrate similar patterns of discrimination," Carter continued, his words carrying implications that sent shockwaves through the assembled aerospace executives. Colonel Foster produced a folder thick with official documents. "Captain Torres has declined reassignment to Pentagon training development in favor of a different mission. Effective immediately, she will be transitioning to civilian status to pursue advanced aviation education reforms." The announcement carried ominous implications for Summit's future. The woman they had rejected would be shaping aviation education policy at the highest levels, with full knowledge of institutional failure she had witnessed firsthand. "Director Barnes," Carla said, her attention returning to Summit's leadership, "I'll be purchasing Summit Aviation Institute. The sale documents were prepared yesterday evening and are already in escrow. The transaction will complete at market close today." The revelation hit like a precision strike. Carla Torres hadn't just been evaluating Summit, she had been positioning to acquire it. The woman they had dismissed as a charity case was about to become their employer. "The first change under new management," she continued, her voice carrying the calm certainty of someone announcing tactical decisions, will be the immediate termination of all personnel who participated in discriminatory actions against students, based on background, appearance, or assumptions about their qualifications. Her gaze swept across Mitchell, Vance, Barnes, and the others who had orchestrated her humiliation. Security will escort you from the premises within the hour. Your final paychecks will include severance payments and non-disclosure agreements, prohibiting you from discussing your employment here. The speed and precision of the institutional changes demonstrated planning that went far beyond spontaneous revenge. This was systematic reform executed with military efficiency. Summit Aviation Institute will be restructured as a merit-based institution focused on developing pilots based on capability rather than connections, Carla announced. Admission will be blind to family background, financial status, and social media following. The only qualifications that will matter are aptitude, dedication, and the courage to earn wings rather than buy them. As security personnel began approaching the terminated staff members, the magnitude of the transformation became clear. Summit's culture of exclusivity was being systematically dismantled by someone with the authority, resources, and expertise to rebuild it from the foundation up. But Captain Carla Torres wasn't finished. As she turned toward the cameras broadcasting her words to millions worldwide, her final statement carried the weight of someone who had fought real battles and emerged victorious. To anyone watching who has been told they don't belong in the sky because of where they come from or what they look like, remember this moment. Excellence isn't inherited, it's earned. And the sky belongs to those brave enough to claim it. The transformation of Summit Aviation Institute began before the F-22's engines had cooled. Within hours of Carla's announcement, security personnel escorted the terminated staff from the premises while moving trucks arrived to remove their personal effects. The speed and efficiency of the operation demonstrated planning that extended far beyond the morning's dramatic revelation. Brittany Hunt's social media empire collapsed in real time as her followers abandoned her platforms in massive numbers. The hashtag she had created to mock Carla, hashtag grounded bird, hashtag hikephobia, hashtag charity case dash, were now being used to document her own downfall. Screenshots of her cruel commentary played alongside footage of Carla's F-22 demonstration, creating a stark contrast that destroyed any remaining credibility she might have possessed. "This is insane," Brittany whispered to her remaining camera operator as they packed equipment under the watchful eyes of security personnel. "How was I supposed to know she was some kind of military superpilot? She looked like, she acted like double quotes, like someone who didn't belong here," the operator suggested, his tone carrying the weight of someone who had witnessed institutional prejudice reveal its true face. Brittany's silence spoke volumes. Her family's wealth and social media influence, the foundations of her identity, meant nothing in the face of genuine competence demonstrated under the most extreme conditions possible. Ryan Mitchell's career in aviation education ended with a security escort to the parking lot, his military decoration suddenly seeming hollow compared to Carla's combat achievements. The man who had questioned her suitability for flight training found himself unemployable in an industry where word traveled fast and memories lasted longer. His replacement arrived that same afternoon, Colonel Sarah Kim, a former Thunderbirds pilot whose credentials included training the next generation of military aviators. Her first act was to review the rigged simulator evaluation that had been used against Carla, documenting the sabotage for potential criminal prosecution. "What we're seeing here," Kim announced to the hastily assembled remaining staff, "represents systematic fraud in aviation training. The individuals responsible could face federal charges for endangering student safety and compromising training standards." Dr. Patricia Vance's psychological practice faced immediate scrutiny from state licensing boards after recordings of her public diagnosis surfaced on social media. Her rush to judgment about Carla's mental fitness delivered without proper evaluation, and in violation of patient confidentiality triggered investigations that would ultimately cost her license to practice. Her replacement was Dr. Maria Santos, a military psychologist whose experience included evaluating pilots for the most demanding missions in American military history. Santos's first recommendation was the implementation of proper psychological assessment protocols that focused on performance rather than prejudice. Marcus Webb Jr. discovered that his family's aerospace connections offered no protection from the consequences of his actions. Video footage of his harassment had gone viral worldwide, creating liability issues for his grandfather's company that extended far beyond personal embarrassment. The Webb family's attempt to distance themselves from Marcus's behavior included a public statement acknowledging that privilege without merit creates individuals who bring shame to family legacy and institutional values. His trust fund was suspended pending completion of what they termed character rehabilitation programs. Scott Barnes's termination as director sent shockwaves through elite aviation circles, but his replacement was already in place by evening. General Patricia Hayes, recently retired from overseeing Air Force Academy operations, brought credentials that transformed Summit's leadership from privileged academics to battle-tested professionals. Summit's new mission, Hayes announced at an emergency press conference, is to identify and develop aviation talent regardless of background, focusing exclusively on capability and character. We will become the institution that evaluates pilots based on what they can do, not where they come from. The student body faced its own reckoning as Carla's new administration implemented immediate reforms. Admission standards were revised to emphasize aptitude testing, psychological evaluation, and demonstrated commitment rather than family connections and financial capability. Students, whose enrollment had been based primarily on family influence, found themselves subject to competency evaluations that many couldn't pass. The dismissal rate in the first month exceeded 40%, but those who remained represented genuine talent that had been overshadowed by privileged mediocrity. Lisa Park, the aviation journalist whose career had been built on documenting elite aviation culture, found herself writing the story that would define her professional legacy. Her article, titled "When Privilege Meets Performance: How America's Elite Aviation Academy Failed Its Greatest Test," became the most-read aviation story of the decade. "The Torres incident," Park wrote, "represents everything wrong with institutions that prioritize connections over competence." Summit students learned that real authority comes from achievement, not inheritance, and that assumptions about capability can be deadly when confronted with genuine expertise. The media coverage extended far beyond aviation publications, as mainstream news outlets picked up the story of institutional prejudice meeting military excellence. Cable news programs featured experts discussing how elite institutions perpetuated discrimination while claiming to develop talent. The Pentagon's response was swift and comprehensive. A review of all civilian aviation partnerships was announced, with specific focus on institutions that demonstrated discriminatory practices. Several academies lost military recruitment privileges, while others faced detailed audits of their admission and training procedures. Colonel Foster was assigned to lead the military's investigation into civilian aviation training standards, with specific authority to recommend termination of partnerships with institutions that failed to meet professional standards. Her first report identified Summit's pre-Torres culture as fundamentally incompatible with military values and operational requirements. The financial implications for Summit's competitors were severe as corporate partners and government agencies reviewed their relationships with elite aviation institutions. The Torres revelation had exposed institutional rot that extended throughout the industry, triggering reforms that would reshape civilian pilot training nationwide. International aviation authorities took notice as well. with European and Asian institutions implementing their own reviews of admission standards and training protocols. The Summit incident became a case study in how institutional prejudice could compromise aviation safety and professional standards, but perhaps the most significant change was the flood of applications from candidates who had previously been excluded from elite aviation training. Veterans, minorities, and students from working-class backgrounds submitted enrollment requests in unprecedented numbers. Drawn by Summit's new merit-based approach, the first graduating class under Carla's leadership would include former military, enlisted personnel, community college graduates, and students whose previous applications had been rejected by institutions that valued connections over capability. Their success rates in both civilian and military aviation careers would ultimately validate the new approach. Within 6 months, Summit Aviation Institute had been transformed from an exclusive playground for the privileged into a genuine center of aviation excellence. The institution that had once prided itself on exclusivity now attracted the most talented candidates regardless of background, creating a pipeline of skilled pilots that served both civilian and military aviation needs. The Torres Revolution, as aviation historians would later term it, represented more than institutional reform. It became a symbol of how merit could triumph over privilege when given the opportunity to demonstrate itself under fair conditions. But for Captain Carla Torres, the transformation of Summit was just the beginning. Her experience had revealed systematic problems throughout civilian aviation training that extended far beyond a single institution. The woman who had been dismissed as unsuitable for flight training was about to reshape an entire industry based on the radical concept that capability mattered more than connections. As she stood in her new office, overlooking the canyon where she had demonstrated the difference between inherited privilege and earned expertise, Carla Torres began planning reforms that would ensure no future pilot would face the discrimination she had endured. The sky, as she had promised, would belong to those brave enough to earn their place in it. 5 years after the F-22 demonstration that reshaped American aviation education, Captain Carla Torres stood before the largest graduating class in Summit Aviation Institute's history. The ceremony took place not in an exclusive indoor venue, designed to impress wealthy donors, but on the same tarmac where she had landed her Raptor to deliver justice to those who had underestimated her. The graduates represented a revolution in aviation training. Veterans from every branch of the military, first-generation college students whose families had never imagined their children would fly, immigrants who had dreamed of American skies, and women who had been told that cockpits were no place for them. Their diversity wasn't a checkbox requirement, it was the natural result of evaluating candidates based on capability rather than connections. Lieutenant Sarah Chun, one of the first students admitted under Summit's new merit-based system, approached the podium to deliver the valedictorian address. Her journey from a working-class family in San Francisco's Chinatown to becoming the top graduate of America's most prestigious aviation academy embodied everything the Torres Revolution had made possible. 5 years ago, Chun began, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. Institutions like this one told people like me that we didn't belong in the sky. Today, I graduate with a direct commission to the Air Force's Test Pilot School, where I'll be evaluating the next generation of military aircraft. The applause that followed came not from wealthy families celebrating inherited privilege, but from working-class parents who had sacrificed everything to support their children's dreams. The sound was different, rawer, more genuine, carrying the weight of barriers broken and assumptions shattered. Major James Rodriguez, a former enlisted Marine whose college education had been funded by the GI Bill, received the Outstanding Achievement Award for his thesis on combat aviation tactics developed during his tours in Afghanistan. His research would be classified and implemented by Special Operations Forces worldwide, work that emerged from lived experience rather than theoretical study. The transformation of Summit had rippled throughout the aviation industry in ways that even Carla hadn't anticipated. Competing institutions faced pressure to diversify their student bodies and admission criteria, while military recruitment programs found themselves flooded with highly qualified candidates from backgrounds previously excluded from elite training. The Pentagon's data told the story in stark numbers. Pilot retention rates had increased by 30%. Mission success rates had improved across all aviation platforms, and the military was attracting candidates whose combination of technical skill and real-world experience created superior aviators. Commercial aviation experienced similar improvements as airlines discovered that merit-based hiring produced pilots whose performance exceeded traditional demographic profiles. The industry's old boy networks found themselves challenged by competence that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. Brittany Hunt had attempted a comeback through a podcast about learning from mistakes, but her efforts were undermined by the very social media platforms that had once amplified her cruelty. Comment sections on her content invariably included footage of Carla's F-22 demonstration alongside screenshots of Brittany's mocking commentary, creating permanent documentation of her poor judgment. Her family's attempts to rehabilitate her image through charitable donations and public apologies fell flat as audiences recognized performative remorse rather than genuine growth. She eventually retreated from public life entirely, her social media influence serving as a cautionary tale about the consequences of weaponizing privilege against merit. Ryan Mitchell's attempts to find employment in aviation education were consistently thwarted by his documented involvement in the Summit scandal. Background checks revealed his role in the simulator sabotage, while reference calls inevitably included discussions of his professional judgment failures. He eventually found work in corporate training for ground-based logistics, his military credentials insufficient to overcome the permanent stain of his actions against one of America's most distinguished combat pilots. His career served as a reminder that institutional authority means nothing without the character to use it responsibly. Dr. Patricia Vance lost her license to practice psychology after state boards concluded that her public diagnosis of Carla violated every standard of professional ethics. Her replacement at Summit, Dr. Maria Santos, had implemented evaluation protocols that became the gold standard for aviation psychology nationwide. Vance's fall from professional grace was complete when her former colleagues published papers detailing how unconscious bias in psychological evaluation could compromise aviation safety. Her case became required study material for aviation psychologists, ensuring that future professionals would understand the consequences of prejudice masquerading as clinical assessment. Marcus Webb Jr.'s trust fund remained frozen as his family's company faced ongoing scrutiny from federal investigators examining discrimination in aerospace contracting. His grandfather's attempt to use family connections to minimize consequences had backfired spectacularly when military officials revealed that such interventions would result in immediate contract terminations. The Webb family's aerospace empire survived, but only after implementing comprehensive diversity initiatives and submitting to federal oversight of their hiring and promotion practices. Marcus himself became a case study in business schools about how individual actions could threaten entire corporate legacies. Scott Barnes never worked in aviation education again. His termination from Summit was followed by investigations that revealed similar patterns of discrimination at his previous institutions. The aviation industry's relatively small professional community ensured that his reputation preceded him wherever he sought employment. His replacement as director, General Patricia Hayes, had transformed Summit into a model that other institutions worldwide sought to emulate. The Academy's graduates were recruited by every major aviation employer, their training recognized as the gold standard for combining technical excellence with leadership capability. The international impact of the Torres Revolution extended far beyond American borders. Aviation authorities in Europe, Asia, and Australia implemented their own reviews of training standards, while several countries invited Carla to consult on reforming their pilot development programs. The European Union established the Torres Protocol's standardized evaluation criteria for aviation training that prioritized demonstrated capability over institutional recommendations. Similar programs emerged in Asia and South America, creating a global movement toward merit-based aviation education. Captain Carla Torres herself had become something approaching a legend in aviation circles. Her name appeared on aircraft, training facilities, and scholarship programs designed to support candidates from underrepresented backgrounds. The woman who had been mocked for her fear of heights had become synonymous with breaking barriers and challenging assumptions, but perhaps her greatest achievement was the quiet transformation of thousands of individual lives. Students who would never have been considered by elite institutions found themselves in cockpits of military and civilian aircraft, their success validating the revolutionary concept that talent could emerge from anywhere. The final speaker at the graduation ceremony was General Michael Carter, whose investigation of Summit 5 years earlier had helped expose institutional discrimination throughout civilian aviation training. His address focused not on past failures, but on future possibilities. The Torres Revolution, Carter concluded, proved that excellence recognizes no boundaries of class, race, gender, or background. It emerges wherever courage meets opportunity, wherever determination encounters fair evaluation, wherever merit is allowed to triumph over prejudice. As the ceremony concluded and graduates prepared to enter careers that would have been impossible under Summit's previous system, Carla Torres reflected on the journey that had brought her from combat pilot to educational reformer. The woman, who had been dismissed as unsuitable for flight training, had reshaped an entire industry based on the simple principle that capability mattered more than connections. The sky, as she had promised 5 years earlier, now belonged to those brave enough to earn their place in it. And for the first time in aviation history, that sky was truly open to anyone with the skill and determination to reach it. Standing beside the same F-22 Raptor that had delivered justice to Summit's halls of privilege, Captain Carla Torres watched her graduates taxi toward takeoff, their aircraft carrying dreams that institutional prejudice had once sought to destroy. The roar of engines ascending toward unlimited sky served as a fitting soundtrack to a revolution that had proven the most important lesson in aviation, that the ability to fly was not determined by where you came from, but by where you had the courage to go. The legacy of the Lightning Queen would endure as long as aircraft took flight, a permanent reminder that excellence, once given the opportunity to demonstrate itself, could not be denied, dismissed, or destroyed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.